Anna from NHCSR. Here it is winter time, and we're planning our field season, and we're reading up, and we're doing a little needs assessment, and I'm learning about things that are well outside of my wheelhouse. I am an entomologist, but I tend to focus a lot on pests and their biocontrols. I don't think a lot about the insects that are just living their lives outside, contributing in their own way to their ecosystem, and talking about conservation, so wildlife. It's very interesting. I have a lot to learn about conservation writ large, but I am fast tracking that by talking to experts in the field, including my conversation with Dr. Kelsey Fisher, who is a researcher at Connecticut's Agricultural Experiment Station. Dr. Fisher and I are both entomologists, so you'll immediately tell that we hit the ground running and get into the weeds almost immediately. Before I even get to my conversation with Kelsey, I'm going to do my best to summarize the story so that you have the tools that you need to understand what we're talking about. Kelsey's life work is really focused on monarch butterfly. Here is a map showing the migration patterns of the monarch butterfly in North America. This image is courtesy of Xerxes Society, who does amazing work when it comes to conservation of wildlife, including insects like monarch butterfly. All of the monarchs east of the Rockies are distinct from those monarchs who live to the west of the Rockies. So the eastern monarchs overwinter in central Mexico, all in the same place, while the western populations migrate to the California coast. You can see those areas in red. The eastern population will spread back northward when they migrate back north during spring and summer to breed on milkweed before the last generation of the summer. Then they journey back to the overwintering areas again. Now keep in mind that the caterpillars only eat milkweed, so this is a critical host plant for their success. The adults will feed on nectar from a wide range of plants, and they actually don't eat too much during the overwintering phase. You'll notice that southern Florida is colored purple to indicate that this is an area where monarchs aren't migrating, but they live all year. And if you notice, Iowa is smack dab in the middle of the summer breeding zone. That is where Kelsey did her work as a PhD student. A critical part of this story is that there have been major concerns with the adoption of transgenic field corn and how that relates to monarch declines. So these transgenic lines have a couple of different technologies stacked on one another, but they come with two very different features: BT resistance and Roundup Ready technology. So Roundup Ready technology is a gene that's inserted into that seed that allows the plant that grows up to be resistant to Roundup. You can spray the whole field, the corn will be fine, and all the weeds underneath will be taken out by that herbicide. BT resistance, on the other hand, these have been genetically altered. They actually had a gene from a bacterium, Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT, so that the plant tissues would make the toxin that's usually produced by the bacterium. So this toxin, or it's a handful of toxins, they're very selective, and they are only toxic to caterpillars, not to other animals, and they are only toxic to caterpillars that are actually eating the corn. It's a gut poison. So in theory, this really should only be impacting pests like European corn borer, and it shouldn't have an impact on caterpillars that only eat milkweed. But the widespread adoption of this kind of field corn coincided so closely in the decline of monarch populations that it raised some serious concerns, which I will let Kelsey explain the whole thing. It was more likely indirect effects of these transgenic lines rather than direct effects. They probably weren't poisoning anybody. But one thing you do have to know to understand this story is how completely different the landscape is in Iowa versus Connecticut. It's really hard to wrap your head around the fact that Iowa is just corn. If you take a look at this land use, everything that is yellow is corn. That's shocking to me. I didn't really think about that until I heard Kelsey say that there's very little public lands in Iowa because most of it is ag land and most of that is corn. Now compare that to this land use map for Connecticut. You can't even find corn on the map. It's mostly green. So keep that in mind as you listen in.
My name is Kelsey Fisher, and I am an entomologist at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. Every time that I talk about monarchs, I have to start by saying that we know far less than the public thinks we do, just in general. And then it's putting one of those things in context with every other species, right? So it's something that the public knows a ton about. We, as researchers and as research communities, know a lot about, especially because we have a great opportunity with monarchs that we don't have for a lot of other species, that the monarchs all overwinter in one spot. Like the eastern population, they're all in Mexico over the winter, and so we know population size estimates. Like, we know a ton more about monarchs than we do about so many other species, most other species, but we still don't know that much.
I remember somebody saying, "Oh, their dad or their grandfather had been a professor of biology at some institution, and he was studying bass something or other, right? I forget the details of it. And somebody, like a member of the public, was like, "Huh, they're still studying bass, huh? They haven't figured that out yet?"
It totally is. And so trying to thread the needle through those things that we do know to try and come up with bigger answers is I think really important, because there's not going to continually be millions of billions of dollars going to monarch butterfly research, because eventually somebody is going to say, "You're still working on that?" And then
So you haven't gotten that figured out. Well, let's start with your first chapter in the whole story.
my master's
Oh,
at the
yes.
University of Delaware, where I worked with Chuck Mason on European corn borer, which is a corn pest. While I was at the University of Delaware, I really loved the research that I was doing, but I didn't, and I really loved the group of people I was working with. I loved working with farmers, I loved working with growers, and I loved having those kind of connections, with the food that we grow and the people who are growing it. Um, but I didn't love talking about pests all the time. And this was also at the time when the idea of GMOs was very contentious. So, the biggest control mechanism for European corn borer is BT corn, which is a genetically modified organism. There was a lot of public debate, public not necessarily acceptance of GMOs, but it is the best pest control mechanism for European corn borer, and also the use of the GMOs for European corn borer control reduces the amount of insecticides that are used in the environment. But I wanted to continue working in the same world. Like, I really loved agriculture. And so there was a group of people that I was working with through working with European corn borer. They're at the USDA ARS in Ames, Iowa. They work on European corn borer, but they also started working on monarch butterflies, because this was also at the same time when the population size was at its lowest point at the overwintering site. So the winter between 2013 and 2014, the monarch butterfly population was at 0.67 hectares, I believe, but it was less than a hectare of overwintering, and that's when the world blew up.
When you're talking about hectares, you're talking about like how much space the overwintering population took up.
So there's so many monarchs that overwinter in Mexico that we can't count them. They go to the same place, and because they're an insect, they're temperature dependent on the environment, and so they cluster together as tightly as possible to stay warm. So it's a little bit like penguins, in that they kind of huddle together to stay warm. So in the high elevation fir forests in Mexico, they're all in the same spot generally. There might be a few different places, but they're clustering by the millions, and they get as tight together as possible. And there's actually really cool photos that you can see the trees turn orange because of the butterflies. And so back in the early 90s, this is when this started, people and it's a wildlife preserve, like reservation, where the butterflies overwinter. And so people that work with the reserve have been walking around the outside of that area to approximate how much space the butterflies take up, because since they're always getting as close together as possible, if they take up a lot of space, there's more butterflies than if they take up less space.
Yes. At first, I was like, oh, is that like how they measure bees as cups?
Oh,
No, it's different. It's
No,
like it's a
no,
measure. It's a measure of how many there are and how they're behaving during that overwintering time.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
because so back in like the 19, I think the papers were coming out like 1974, 76, sometime around that time when people in the United States found the overwintering site in Mexico. So it was like that's when the National Geographic cover came out and all of the like big knowledge of the monarch butterfly overwintering site. And there's a really cool paper. So it's Urquhart and Urquhart, and it's them reporting finding the overwintering site, and they talk about trying to approximate how many butterflies were there, and there are so many that they tried to quantify, like they're trying to count it, but they're moving, right? Like so
Yeah.
so that's a piece of it. But they what they did was they looked at a tree limb and saw how much, like where that tree limb was with butterflies on it, and then they removed the butterflies and the tree limb goes up because there's no weight on it, and then they put rocks on the tree limb to try and bring it back down to where the level was, and then weigh all of those rocks that brought that tree limb down to that level, and then approximate based on how much mass butterflies are, how many butterflies would have been on that limb. And that's for one limb on this tree.
Okay.
Like so it's not even possible to
Right.
approximate how many butterflies there are.
Okay. 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 That's very
And
interesting.
then but the thing that's really interesting, that aside from this, is I talk about the eastern population of monarch butterflies. I
Sure.
don't talk about the western one. I don't have experience there, and based on the people that work out there, it seems like they're very different. And on the west coast, when they count monarch butterflies, they count numbers of butterflies. So it's just an interesting difference.
It's a cultural thing. It's a
Yeah.
genetic thing. It's a
Yeah.
biogeochemical thing.
Yeah, so when we talk about the ones that are overwintering in Mexico, there's just like far too many butterflies. We can't count them.
So I stopped you. So you
Yeah.
were interested while that
Yeah,
population
so
was at its lowest.
yeah, so while I was doing my masters was when the monarchs hit their lowest point, and that's when like the world exploded with talking about monarch butterflies. And there's a lot of people that have been working on monarch butterflies before that point, but that was a little bit of what's it called? Like a flashpoint, I guess. Where like something happens and then like the world kind of changes a little bit and like
Yeah.
changes its perspective on it. And so that's when a lot of the like grant money was starting to go to monarch butterfly conservation, and the general public was starting to like really prioritize this. And the people that I was working with on European corn borer that are out in Ames, Iowa, also are the people who worked on monarch butterfly conservation back when BT corn was first introduced in 1996. There was a whole thing about BT corn pollen potentially impacting monarch butterfly survival, and so that is the group that has the evidence that says like, oh, it's probably not, like that's not really a risk for monarch butterfly caterpillars to be dying because of exposure to corn pollen. The way that monarch caterpillars would get exposure to corn pollen is that there's milkweed in cornfields, or there was milkweed in cornfields, and corn pollen would fall on the milkweed, and the caterpillar or the butterflies would lay eggs on the milkweed. Then the caterpillars would hatch and they would eat the milkweed that has corn pollen on it, and the monarchs can't differentiate. They just kind of munch and munch and munch. And so if there is high enough levels of corn pollen with BT in it, BT would kill them. But it's not at a high enough level that that would be a source of monarch population decline. So they did this research back in the early 90s. And so this group, when people were concerned about monarchs again and the population was at its lowest point, this group ramped back up again and said, oh,
I
we've
see.
done some monarch stuff before. Like, we are the right people to start tackling this problem. And so the monarch decline became public, and this group came together at Iowa State. It's the Iowa Monarch Conservation Consortium. So Iowa is kind of like the heart of all of this, and it's really important because lots of butterflies come from there. I can't say this as dogmatic as it once was, but there's an association between the monarch butterfly population decline and loss of milkweed in that breeding core region. The loss of milkweed is because of the introduction of glyphosate resistant crops. So farmers could spray indiscriminately, their crops would stay okay, and all of the weeds that they have would go away because they'd be able to spray them and it would all be happy. Milkweed is, I think, still, but maybe not still. It's been a while since I've checked the list. Listed as a noxious weed in the state of Iowa. It was really terrible in the cornfields, but then farmers were able to get rid of weeds really relatively easily in comparison to hand pulling or other methods that they were using before. So not only is the milkweed within cornfields going away, but cornfields were able to get bigger. So places where, like along the outside edges of cornfields, fence rows, those kinds of things, cornfields, instead of being something that a farmer could manage on a tractor, are becoming these huge things that you can't even see the end of. And so not only is it the milkweed within the cornfields, but also like around cornfields they're able to be much more efficient with crop production in the Midwest. So it's not only it's because glyphosate resistant crops made it easier to farm. So making it easier to farm removed the milkweed from the Midwest.
Right. That's very funny because it started out being like, oh, it's GMO crops. And you're like, well, actually it's not, it is, but it's not the way you think it is.
Right? Exactly. It's not the cropping system per se. It's because we just became better farmers.
Did you get a lot of like, okay, nerd, whatever, it's GMOs, like I was right? Like, was that a lot of your experience?
So much, and
Okay.
especially in the Midwest, because they love corn and soybean, right? So like they're not going to argue with like, but it's different on the East Coast, right? There's totally different culture in how people.
It was such an impressive feat. Like, as much as we talk about agriculture and monocultures, like I think when you live in that culture, you go, look at what it's done to our local economies.
Yeah.
Like, look at the amazing thing that we've accomplished by developing this technology. And they can see the direct line, like it has improved people's lives in a really tangible way. Whereas if you're in the East Coast, like you can't see that. You can't feel that. What are you doing now that you're up in Connecticut? Like, are you teaching people about monarchs? Like, is that being parlayed into something else?
I am still doing some monarch butterfly work because I have a lot of things left over that that I'm still wanting to wrap up, and like I spent 7 years of my life studying monarchs, and so like even though I have all these other lines of things that I'm interested in, it would be silly to just stop, right? Like because like I've built so many things around this, but I will say that the challenge is a little bit different. One thing that is definitely a challenge for me is this frame of reference of like monarch productivity in the region. And like in Iowa, we have 2 to 3 breeding season generations, which means that there's just tons and tons of monarchs throughout the year. Like they're everywhere. And then coming here, they're not everywhere. And it's because we have one season or one generation of breeding season monarchs in this region. They come in, they lay their eggs, and then those are the ones that should be making it down to Mexico.
Okay.
And it's so long too. When I spoke with the public in my first few years, I was like, you guys have one generation, and they're like, no, we don't, we have two. And it tricked me. I was like, wait, is there two? And then over like being able to look over my data collection for the past few years, like, no, it's one. It's just really spread, so it takes a really long time for the monarchs to get here, and then you have your caterpillars. So it might, to an untrained eye, look like we have two generations of caterpillars, but it's really just one generation of caterpillars. It's just that
you're seeing them.
You're just seeing them for so long. A lot of the work that I was doing was kind of trying to understand, like, and this was from Iowa and then brought it into Connecticut. I actually have a paper in review right now is looking at within plant quality changes and how like monarchs might be preferring to feed on different parts of the plant. So if you have a plant, they're feeding on the top where the young growth is, not on the bottom. And there's like a few other behavioral things that we don't need to get into, but this ties into when when they're feeding on the young growth, when they get to Connecticut and it's all old growth, then they don't like laying eggs on it and they don't like feeding on it. And it has all this like yucky, like the plants are hard and tough and gross. And when it's once it goes into its flowering stage, the plant doesn't produce any new growth because all of the plant's energy is diverted into reproduction. So building on all this idea of like within plant variation of plant quality for or host quality for monarchs, there's also a lot of work that's been going on looking at the impact of mowing on milkweed production. And the reason for the impact of mowing on milkweed production is because in the Midwest, we have very, very few areas of public land. I think Iowa is like 97% privately owned. So if any conservation efforts are going to happen for monarch butterflies, it's going to happen on somebody's property that they own. It's not going to be able to be on like a state park because we don't really have that much state park.
Yeah.
The place that we do have public land is on roadsides. And so a lot of conservation efforts have gone in with roadside reconstruction, prairie reconstruction. And a really cool thing that happened because of the group that I was a part of at Iowa State is that the Department of Transportation has like an agreement, or I don't know how formal it is, but anytime they do construction and they have to rip up the grass, instead of planting grass again, they plant a pollinator mix. So it's just like
Okay.
slowly making progress, which is very cool. So the reason that this mowing work has been going on is because the habitat restoration happens on roadsides,
Hmm.
and roadsides need to be managed for visibility. And so there's a whole lot of effort from the Department of Transportation that says if we're going to do habitat restoration, we need to mow for public safety. Please tell
Okay.
us when we should mow. And so there was a
Oh,
bunch of work going on to figure out when mowing should happen. And they stumbled upon this thing that the milkweed regenerates and it accumulates way more eggs. And it make like there's so many things that make mowing feel like a really good thing for monarch production. There's also some reasons that it might not be a good thing for monarch production because monarchs, the milkweed senescing might be one of the cues that they use to migrate south, and so it could delay their like
I
entering of
see.
diapause. So there's like it's a weird balance that we have to find, but there's potential that mowing your milkweed could be could be helping with
That
monarch
is,
production.
did they say we just have to do it once or twice and like you tell us when to do it? Like what was the
Yeah,
restrictions on that?
pretty much. They just
Okay.
said that we can't have plants blocking visibility.
Right. So it just had to be done once a year?
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. They kind of
Okay.
said it could be once a year, it could be twice a year, like, but they said it needs to happen at least one time.
Yeah, and you
And
can
they
tell
what
us
they
when.
really wanted to know was because if without even thinking about regenerating the milkweed, if you mow when you have caterpillars on plants, you are accidentally taking those caterpillars. So that's a Endangered Species Act phraseology. So you're accidentally killing all of the caterpillars if you mow over
Okay.
while there's caterpillars feeding. Because the monarch has these like generations, if you mow when monarchs are flying, not when you have caterpillars feeding, then you're not accidentally taking from the population. You're not accidentally killing your
So
caterpillars.
wow, you're really threading the needle with that right time to mow question.
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
the biggest thing, it's like it's with any other entomology thing that we talk about is scouting, right? So like if you're going to mow somewhere, you go out and you look to see if
Yeah.
it actually aligns with what you think is happening. So, you have to scout in pest management and you have to scout in conservation.
This actually leads into a question. I'm going to ask you this question now because I don't want to forget. Because I mentioned to you one of my podcast co-hosts is he's like a specialized landscaper and he wants to build pollinator gardens for people in their backyards. He's not a novice, like he's got a lot of experience in like gardening specifically. He was asking about these roadside plantings, if they are isolated, do they turn into ecological traps? Right? So like are there places where it's a good place to put these additional things? And are there features that it's actually quite bad? Like is it like kind of going from good to neutral to bad? Like are there scenarios where you would tell the highway system, oh, don't put them there?
Accidentally creating like a place for a sink population.
Yeah.
It really depends on the species that you're working with. So for monarchs specifically, they're incredibly mobile. And I would say more likely there's not going to be a sink population anywhere because they just move around a lot. And if there is an area that they don't do so well, the butterflies that laid eggs in that area also laid eggs in lots of other areas too. So adult females can lay about up to 400 eggs. And they lay eggs singly, so they'll only, and they really like, they love hopping from one spot to another. One of the biggest conservation like strategies that we say for monarchs is to create small stepping stones of habitat. And a lot of the work I did in my PhD was figuring out how to distribute these small stepping stones of habitat through a landscape. And so for monarchs, probably not.
And any other strong flyer,
any other strong flyer,
general blanket strong flyers, no problem.
Yeah. Now, I'm very curious about the idea of pollinator gardens and how things are distributed within the Northeast New England area. And this ties into some work that I've been building out of. It's not monarchs, but I work with bumblebees. And we're now at a point that we have established a ton of gardens. And like if you think back to 2013 when the monarch was declined and everybody, and then we also had colony collapse disorder, which is not
whatever that means,
which has like changed names and things are different now, but
yeah.
That all happened kind of at the same time. And so the public notion was plant flowers for pollinators, and now that's everywhere. Everybody, it's all plant a garden for pollinators. It's been like, I don't know, over 10 years, and we've been establishing these gardens, and now we're at a point that we can see if they're working. And so with bumblebees, I am working to understand, and I have a postdoc working on this project with me too, but working to understand how many bumblebee colonies are being supported by individual gardens, and are these gardens creating habitat stepping stones that the bumblebees are able to have more functional use of the land because of them? Or are we creating sinks where you would have like one or two colonies visiting this place and they're not visiting anywhere else because they can't get anywhere else? So I don't have an answer to that yet. I'm optimistic that they're creating stepping stones, but we don't know.
Here's my question. This has been really fascinating to me. Well, first I have a joke for you, and then a question about like the matrix that these gardens exist within, right? I heard recently the difference between rural, suburban, and urban. If you're naked on your front porch and nobody cares because they don't see you, it's rural. If you're naked on your front porch and they call the cops, it's suburban. If you're naked on the front porch and nobody cares, that's urban.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree? Because you've lived in all these. You've lived in all these areas.
I don't know if all these places.
I don't know if you've tested this, but
I haven't
maybe.
tested this, but I just based on general vibes of people in these places, yeah.
But to take the practices and like the ecological framework that you were able to test in Iowa and then lay that over the landscape in Connecticut, that sounds very challenging. Like, how are you approaching that?
Okay, so this is one of the things that is fascinating to me, because I try to like there's two things that are like the foundation of all of the work that I do. One is habitat suitability. So what is habitat and what is matrix? And the other one is movement ecology. So how do insects move through whatever this habitat and matrix is? So I could argue that it's not that different.
Oh, okay.
Because we have cornfield matrix or we have parking lot matrix. And in both situations, there's nothing there for monarchs.
Right.
So it's just how do they get through that? And there's like a few things that are different. But I mean, even if we talk about urban heat island, like cornfields are hot too.
That's a good point. Like you would be having high elevated temperature.
Yeah.
Ooh, and depending on what's there, like if the corn's there versus bare soil and things like that. Selfishly, I do want to ask you about like insectary plantings because is if you have like a brand new garden somewhere versus a garden that's already been established, how long does it take each of these groups to find them, right?
You're like hitting a million different like projects that I have.
Right?
So this
And
isn't oh, go ahead.
you know my best friend Don Weber. He is often teaching people in urban environments. He's like, you never know. It's a crapshoot. Who's going to find it first? But in general, the pests tend to find the plantings first because they're
Hmm.
usually stronger flyers than their natural enemies. And so maybe they both are very good at finding their hosts. They have olfactory cues. They have this, that, and the other thing. But it takes the pests a little bit quicker to find their host and like the biocontrols kind of follow after. Would you agree or
Cool.
disagree?
I would agree too, because you need to have the pest there in order for the
Mm-hmm.
biocontrol to find it.
Right.
So they would have to that in that context. But when we think about pollinators, that one with pollinators and pests, I would be curious because I feel like they might have a level like an even footing of like
Yeah.
the ability to get to different things.
But also, not to talk too much about how the sausage is made, but I think, like, for a young scientist to come to their new position, like, you're gonna take different approaches to designing what your research program looks like. Some things are going to meet a need, like either there's a gap in the literature, or you have a grower group, or you have a stakeholder group that has a problem and you'd like to solve it. And then you're also going to have some things that are like, these are the resources I have. And to have a resource of existing gardens in a lot of different places, like, I mean, whatever the equivalent of dollar signs in your eyes is for somebody who's trying to design a really nice field experiment, like, I think that would be really exciting.
Hmm.
And it has so many applications to, the questions we have about the guys mowing the side of the lawn, me who wants to like enhance biocontrol on farms. Like, it has a lot of implications. I'm excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, yeah. And with these gardens, a big reason that I I pivoted in that direction is because there are some like very strong community groups that are like I got into my position here and they were like, "Hi Kelsey, we'd like to talk to you." So it's like, and it's not a, it's great because then I found
Yeah.
out. So one of them is called Pollinator Pathway, which started in Connecticut and has spread everywhere. So there's like a few like right around where I'm located. There are like a few. It's like the kind of starting point for how pollinator pathways came together. And so there's like some really strong groups. But then we have all these land trusts, which is something that I didn't have in Iowa. So I didn't know that land trusts were a thing. I mean, I'm sure they exist in Iowa, but not as strongly as they do here. And like a lot of them in this area, they're putting in meadows and they're like maintaining different places that are. And so like I have all these like little places that I'm able to work with, and like they all kind of came to me, and then as I talked to them about an idea, they're like, "Oh, well, have you met so and so in this other organization?" And then I meet them, and then I have like access to the gardens they're using,
So neat.
and one of the things that I really value, and I haven't gotten there yet, so if any of them listen to this, like please, I'm working on it. Um, is that I want to be able to provide results to what I'm using their garden for. We're not there
Yeah.
yet. We're getting there, but like but I'm hoping that I'm able to do that too. So then it's like not just I'm using their stuff, but also like they're benefiting from learning about what's going on.
Hey,